To understand the metaphor of the vessel of water in the text, here is a brief explanation. Imagine a vessel filled to the brim with water. This is the concentration camp. The water in the vessel is nothing other than the environment of total suffering, hunger, cold, fear, and constant humiliation. The prisoner finds themselves completely immersed in this environment, deprived of air and any control. At first glance, the vessel seems like a perfect image of helplessness. A person is merely a passive victim who could be drowned at any moment. Lessons of history. When hope was the only weapon. 1. Introduction. History as a teacher of fragile strength. History does not speak in whispers. It cries out through the ruins of cities, through the graves of millions, and through the thin voices of those who survived the unendurable. If we listen carefully, history does not only recount cruelty, it also reveals something paradoxical. That in the bleakest hours of human existence, where physical power was crushed and reason seemed powerless, it was often hope that served as the last and most resilient weapon. This chapter is dedicated to one of the most piercing testimonies of such a paradox, Viktor Frankl's reflections in Man's Search for Meaning. Frankl, a psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, wrote not only as a witness to suffering but as a scientist observing human nature at its breaking point. His analysis forces us to ask, what enables some to survive where others perish? His answer was neither brute strength nor luck alone. It was the capacity to hold meaning in one's mind, to tether oneself to a purpose, however fragile, and to preserve the ember of hope when the surrounding world was ashes. To grasp this lesson, we must explore the inner landscape of the camps, the psychological microcosm where human dignity was stripped, and yet, paradoxically, where human spirit revealed its capacity for transcendence. Blank. Blank. Next part. Viktor Frankl and the question of survival. Frankl observed an unsettling truth. In the concentration camps, survival often depended less on physical constitution than on mental orientation toward the future. The strongest, the healthiest, the most muscular men did not necessarily outlast the frail. Hunger, disease, and violence were mercilessly democratic. What tilted the balance was whether a prisoner could locate a reason to endure, however distant or abstract. A father who longed to see his child again. A writer who clung to the hope of finishing a manuscript. A believer who refused to surrender the conviction that life itself held ultimate meaning. Frankl called this orientation toward purpose the will to meaning. Without it, the psyche collapsed. The body followed soon after. He tells of prisoners who, upon losing hope, surrendered to death almost instantly. They laid down in the mud, refused food, stopped moving, not because their muscles failed, but because their spirit had already left the battlefield. In the hell of the camps, the most basic truth of psychology was revealed with brutal clarity. Man does not live by bread alone. Next part. The vessel of water, a metaphor of control. Let us imagine the camp as a vessel filled with water. In this vessel, prisoners were immersed, stripped of air, pressed against one another. The liquid was not pure, it was the thick, suffocating water of hunger, cold, humiliation, and fear. At first glance, the prisoner is simply drowning. He has no control. Guards decide his rations, his labor, his sleep, even whether he lives another hour. From this perspective, the vessel seems like a perfect image of helplessness. Yet Frankl's testimony adds another layer. Within this vessel, some prisoners discovered that they could still move, however slightly. A gesture of kindness, a memory of a poem, a whispered joke, a silent prayer, a scrap of bread shared. Each of these was like finding a small bubble of air within the drowning vessel, not enough to escape, but enough to remind oneself, I am not completely powerless. For the majority, the water pressed down until they sank. But for those who searched for micro moments of agency, the very act of searching itself became a kind of oxygen. Thus, The vessel of water is not only a metaphor of drowning but also a metaphor of choice within constraint. The camp was designed to strip prisoners of control. Yet the human mind found that even in extremity, one could seize tiny fragments of freedom, how to respond, what attitude to adopt, where to direct one's inner gaze. This fragile recognition of agency was often the dividing line between despair and endurance. Next part: helplessness and the collapse of spirit. Psychology has a concept for what happens when one internalizes total lack of control, learned helplessness. Experiments later confirmed what Frankl had already witnessed. When beings are repeatedly exposed to uncontrollable suffering, they cease trying to escape, even when escape becomes possible. In the camps, many prisoners fell into this state. To the outside observer, it appeared as resignation. Men lying in their bunks, refusing to rise when the siren called, letting food rot in their bowls, their eyes vacant. Frankl described them as men who had already decided against life, even before their bodies succumbed. This collapse was contagious. When one prisoner gave up, those around him felt their own resolve weaken. The vessel of water seemed heavier, thicker, pulling more victims into its depths. The Nazis had designed the camp as a system of psychological attrition, not only physical extermination. The destruction of spirit preceded the destruction of flesh. Next part: hope as the last weapon. Against this tide of despair stood the fragile, invisible force of hope. It is essential to stress: hope in the camps was not naive optimism. Prisoners knew that statistically, survival was nearly impossible. They did not deceive themselves with fantasies of sudden liberation. Instead, hope took more subtle forms. Hope in reunion. I must live to see my wife again. Hope in testimony. If I survive, I will tell the world. Hope in work. This unfinished book, this half-written idea, must be completed. Hope in transcendence. Even here, suffering can hold meaning. Frankl himself clung to the idea of reconstructing his lost manuscript. Later, he interpreted his survival as a responsibility, to turn suffering into teaching, to write, to heal others. This orientation toward meaning acted as a shield against the corrosive acid of helplessness. Hope did not eliminate suffering, but it redefined suffering into a task rather than a void. Next part: the alchemy of meaning. One of Frankl's most striking insights is that suffering itself can be transmuted into meaning. This is a radically different philosophy from the pursuit of pleasure or power. In the camp, there was no pleasure to pursue, no power to seize. But there remained the possibility of turning endurance itself into a victory of spirit. A man who chose to comfort another, to share his crust of bread, to maintain dignity in humiliation. Such a man transformed suffering into a moral act. His life, however short, became a testament that even in a universe of cruelty, human freedom had not been extinguished. Frankl's philosophy, which he later called logotherapy, rests on this principle. Life never ceases to hold meaning, even in its darkest corners. Despair arises not from suffering itself, but from the belief that suffering is meaningless. Thus, hope was not simply wishful thinking. It was a cognitive and existential decision to interpret one's agony as a chapter within a larger narrative, a burden that pointed beyond itself. Next part: the dual face of the vessel. Let us return to the metaphor of the vessel filled with water. For some, the vessel was an instrument of death. They drank from it and drowned in despair. For others, the vessel became a mirror, reflecting their inner strength. They dipped their hands into it and discovered that even in the worst conditions, one could choose how to hold oneself. Water is both a medium of drowning and a medium of life. In the camps, the same reality destroyed some and revealed the courage of others. The difference lay in the presence or absence of hopeful interpretation. Helplessness saw only the suffocating water. Hope saw the possibility of still swimming, still reaching for air, still affirming life even when surrounded by death. Next part: Beyond the Camps, Universal Lessons. Why revisit such horror? Because the camps, though historically specific, expose a universal truth about the human condition. Every life, at some point, becomes a kind of vessel. We are plunged into circumstances we cannot control: illness, grief, failure, loss. Like the prisoners, we are tempted to surrender to helplessness, to let despair whisper, "Nothing you do matters." Yet history testifies otherwise. If hope could survive in Auschwitz, it can survive anywhere. If meaning could be found amidst the chimneys of smoke, it can be found in the disappointments and wounds of ordinary existence. Frankl's testimony is not only about the Holocaust. It is a map of the human psyche under duress, a reminder that our survival, individually and collectively, depends on cultivating the capacity for hope as weapon, shield, and compass. Conclusion: hope as history's secret weapon. In the darkest of human laboratories, the death camps, Viktor Frankl discovered the most paradoxical truth: that those who endured were not the strongest of body, but the strongest of spirit. The vessel of water teaches us this. Helplessness drowns, but hope allows one to breathe even in depths. Hope is not fantasy. It is a biological, psychological, and existential force. It transforms suffering into meaning, and meaning into survival. When history asks us, what is the weapon of the powerless? The answer is simple, though not easy. Hope, for without it, humanity dissolves. With it, even in the most inhuman of places, humanity endures. I truly hope these ideas will inspire you on your own path of discovery. If you know someone who would find this perspective valuable, please share this video with them. And to make sure you don't miss what's next, subscribe and join me for the upcoming videos.